we go. Hello, everybody. This is Jacob Jans with Writing Launch. I want to thank you for being with us today and welcome. So today, Ian Chandler is going to be giving a presentation about how you can build a framework for a long-term success as a freelance writer, not just like getting one or two publications or getting paid once or twice as a freelance writer. He's going to talk about what you need to know really to have long-term success as a freelance writer, and how you can really build your freelance writing career in a way that works for you. At Writing Launch, we do a lot in terms of helping our Writing Launch members succeed, and we have courses that like go into detail about how to succeed in the long term, and also courses about how to do like some of the nitty-gritty things like pitching. And for those of you who are watching the webinar today, Ian's going to mention a lot of our courses, and I just want you to know that you can have free access to those courses. If you join Writing Launch, you can join the courses for free. Just use the coupon code FREE and your first month of membership will be completely free. Recently, someone joined Writing Launch and he asked me to give feedback on on a pitch he wanted to send a pretty major publisher, and I did like 3 or 4 rounds of feedback on his pitch, and it just kept getting better and better. And when he sent it out, he got a response from an editor within a few hours, which was pretty incredible. And that's just one of the types of things that we do for our Writing Launch members in addition to the courses. But really getting a response from an editor once, as great as that is, it's so much better to have a framework and to know what to do, so you can just keep getting responses from editors in the long term, so you can continue to build a career and have the income that you want and the type of freelance writing career that you want. So a lot of the things that Ian's talking about today will help you do just that. He's been teaching writers this type of thing for a long time now, and I'm really happy that he's put this presentation together for us today. So without further ado, here's Ian.
Hello, everybody. Welcome to today's webinar. Like Jacob said, I'm very excited to be presenting this today. Sort of a framework for thinking about building a career. I'm going to go over the specifics in a minute. But this whole presentation and a lot of the content in Writing Launch came about as a result of me being frustrated that there were no good resources for this kind of thing out there. And even today, I mean, it's a little better, but if you look for different freelance writing sources, it can really be tough to find good ones that are, A, worth the money, B, putting out the right content, and C, giving you enough attention and guidance. And, we couldn't find anything like that. So we just decided to make it. And that's what you go with Writing Launch. And like Jacob said, I'm going to be mentioning a lot of our courses today. Definitely sign up for that free month, the first month being free. That's a, fantastic offer, and I highly advise you to take advantage of that. We've had so many members just do so much within that month, and so many of them stay and finish all these courses and things like that. So without further ado, let's get started. There's a lot of content coming your way today, so over the next hour or so we're going to be talking about this framework. So this is going to be about how to build a thriving freelance career. And I need to make a few disclaimers before we begin, just so we're all kind of on the same page. First of all, we're going to be covering freelance writing and not creative writing. This is a question that I get quite a lot. And briefly, the difference is that freelance writing is a whole different type of writing. It's not about, sharing a story. It's about, providing value to somebody. It's about writing content that's going to help somebody, whether that's, like the situation of writing an article to help a publication get more readers and to expand their content, writing content for a company to help them sell a product. We're talking about that kind of stuff. So we're not going to be covering poetry, fiction, etc. And the advice in here is not applicable to that. So if you came hoping for creative writing advice, unfortunately, you're in the wrong place, but there are great resources for that elsewhere. And I also need to say that building a freelance career from scratch is going to take time and it's going to take effort. This is not easy, quick stuff. It can be easy if you know the shortcuts and the ways to do it, but it's still going to take time. And I don't like sugarcoating things. It took me a long time to build this up. And if you want to build a long-term, full-time freelance writing career, it will take a while, but that doesn't mean it's not worth it. In fact, quite the opposite. This is a question that we get a lot too, and you can be located anywhere in the world and still do freelance writing. I think we actually got an email about this earlier today, because I think people who aren't in the U.S. or a sort of main country like that, a large country perhaps, they think that they can't be a freelance writer because of the limitations of their country. And really, there are no reasons why you shouldn't be able to. You might have to find out ways to get paid or things like that. But I mean, you can work from anywhere in the world. And that's the great thing about freelance writing, is that it can be remote. And there are people who travel the world doing this stuff. So you can certainly live anywhere and still do this. So location is not an issue. And this is also another big kind of FAQ question that we get. You do not need to have an existing portfolio. And in fact, I'm going to teach you how to build one, how to get one set up, how to find the content for one, because what a lot of writers run into is they want to write, but they have no published work. And then to get published work, it's like they need published work. So it seems like a catch-22, but I'm going to go over how to overcome that. But just know for now that you do not need to have anything published as of yet. Now, this advice that I'm going to be sharing today is aimed at people who want to become full-time writers. You can apply this to part-time, but you'll have to adjust it a bit, things like long-term goals and whatnot. But this is ideally for people who want to do this, for the long-term full-time as their main source of income. And also, what I'm going to be sharing is a framework, not a formula. While this has definitely worked for me and others, I can't promise that it will work for you. And more than anything, freelancing is really about finding what works for you. It's about just taking action and figuring out what brings you success. So definitely keep that in mind as we move forward. So let's just talk about getting started. What do you need to start a freelance career? You need a few things. The most important is a passion for helping people. And this is really the crux of freelance writing and business as a whole. And I think this is something that doesn't get talked about a lot, because when people think about freelancing and business, they often think of, really bad sort of just doing things for money, situations like that. But it's quite the opposite. In my time as a freelancer, I've been able to help so many businesses, small mom and pop businesses that were, struggling or, trying to get their name out there, make a living for themselves, people who needed, something like a resume or a bio written so that they could get a job, all these great organizations. And it's easy to work with people like that. It's easy to find those opportunities. And so when it comes down to it, you as the writer are looking to provide value to somebody. Your job is to help others. And that's where that passion comes in. You also need the willingness to learn, which sounds a bit trite, I admit, but it really is important, because freelancing is all about learning. It's about failing and getting back up again. It's about trying, failing, repeating until you find something that works. And I'm going to be talking about that a lot later today in terms of action and how to take action more and how to train yourself for that. But you need to just be able to be quite flexible when it comes to learning new things and just getting up off the ground and trying again. You also need self-motivation, which kind of ties into that. And then short-term and long-term plans, those are both extremely important, and the right mindset. I'm going to be talking about that today as well. So all these things are just sort of a brief primer on what you need, especially in terms of mindset and just approach and attitude to start a freelancing career. Now let's talk about making plans, because this is one of the most important things that you can do at the beginning of your career. And the reason that I'm talking about this before any of the, kind of juicy stuff is because it's so critical to know what your plans are. Because if you don't have plans, you will almost automatically fail because you don't know where you're going. It's a bit like going out on a road trip and not having a destination in mind. Like something cool may happen, but you're probably going to get lost. What you need to do is make plans based on your goals. And again, that sounds simple, but you would be surprised at how many writers do not put this into action. And, how many, I think this just is sort of a human nature thing where we kind of just expect things to kind of work out in our favor, and we figure we don't need to put a lot of effort into it. But the opposite is very true. You really need to make actionable and tangible plans based on specific goals that you can track. And I'll elaborate on all this as we go on. To give you an example, here are some questions that you should be asking yourself before you even start thinking about freelancing. You need to think about, what type of writing do you want to do? And that could be, article writing, copywriting, those different types of writing, grant writing, biography writing, resume writing, things like that. You need to have just even a loose idea of that in mind. What niches do you want to write in? And so, when you're thinking about topic categories like gardening or spirituality or marketing or things like that, cooking, food, travel, you need to have a loose idea of that in mind as well. Do you want to write full-time or part-time? Kind of speaks for itself, but you need to think about also how full-time or how part-time you want to do, have a loose idea of how many hours per week you want to work. And what type of companies and publications do you want to work with? What type of people do you want to help as a freelance writer? And this is really important, because knowing who you want to work with, the types of people, the types of businesses, is really instrumental in helping yourself get off the ground. Because I find that a lot of beginner freelance writers tend to scramble and just take any opportunity they can get, and then they end up regretting it because they don't really have a defined idea of who they want to work with. And that's one thing that I've kind of talked about recently, is that as the freelance writer, you are the one calling the shots. It's you who are choosing to work with these people. These people aren't just choosing to work with you. It's also, you make the initial call to say, okay, hey, I want to work with this company. You're not just getting whatever job you can take. You have everything to choose from. And so that's really empowering when you think about it. And coming at it from that angle is really important to understanding your role as a freelance writer. So you're not just an employee, you're almost a collaborator. And also, how much do you want to make or need to make, depending on if you're doing this full-time or part-time. If you end up joining and you get your first month free, we actually have a freelance rate setting masterclass that is sort of one of the hidden gems of Writing Launch. But this goes over in detail how to figure out how much you need to make. It's sort of like a freelance income calculator. So definitely take advantage of that if you sign up. But even if you don't, you need to think about this, what's a figure you need to make monthly, yearly, etc. Now let's talk about building a freelance mindset. And this is one of the most important things. And again, this is kind of what we have to cover before we get into the nitty gritty stuff, because it's so instrumental in just doing everything right. Because, for example, when I started out, I didn't have a freelance mindset at all. I was just totally lost. I was treading water. I was trying to figure out where to go and what to do. And as a result, I did many things that were counterproductive. I did many things that set me back. And it was all because I just didn't have the right mindset. I thought, like many people, that being a freelance writer was just sort of like, working all these odd jobs, getting paid, a couple pennies per word or something like that. Not really getting to choose who you work with, all this stuff. And that's just what I thought it was. And that mindset really set me back. I mean, I lost probably a couple of years of progress that really stunted my growth. And so that's why I'm talking about all of this. And you'll probably find yourself kind of resonating with these things as I go through. And first of all, most freelance writers fail because they have the wrong mindset. And maybe you've failed before as a freelance writer, and maybe people who have, maybe you've seen stories of people who have. The most common cause is having the wrong mindset, because the mindset is what's going to enable you to make goals and take actions on your plans. Excuse me. Without the right mindset, you're just going to be lost. You're not going to know what to do. So that's why it's so important. This is why I stress it so much. Writers tend to fail because of inaction, uncertainty, hesitancy. These are all big reasons I've seen writers fail. I've seen many people say, okay, I'm thinking about giving up because of this, but often they're just not taking enough action. They're holding back a little too much. They're getting too worried and too caught up in the what ifs, and they're just not taking action. They're not moving forward. That's one of the biggest reasons the writers fail. And that's why I'm going to be stressing it so much, not only now, but later in the webinar as well. And on top of that, many writers fail because they spend too much time planning and not enough time doing. And I run into this all the time. We have a lot of current and former members who I've talked to, and they talk to me about their worries as freelancers. Worries that they're not going to be able to get the article, they're not going to be able to make X amount of money or whatever. And I always just ask them, well, why haven't you tried? And they just get caught up in wanting to make the perfect pitch, the perfect outreach message. They want to do everything so perfectly so that it has the highest chance of succeeding. When in reality, they're just holding themselves back. They're waiting too long. Before you know it, the opportunity that they're looking at has passed. They can't, it's not available anymore. That door has closed, and that happens all the time. It's really kind of tragic to see, and so that's why I'm talking about it here, because I want to try to prevent that. When it comes down to it, freelance writing is ultimately about both planning and acting. And that doesn't mean that you should just, act without thinking about it at all. That doesn't mean you should just, write the first thing that comes to mind and send it off. But you need to have a balance of planning and acting, because most freelance writers, especially ones who are starting out, they just plan. They plan. That's all they do. And that's good in a way. But if it comes at the cost of not acting, that can be really dangerous. And that's where you get into that territory of, kind of slipping and failing and not being able to get back up because you don't know what to do. And you've spent so much time planning that you don't even know how to take action. That's a big problem that I see. And ultimately, you just can't successfully build a thriving freelance career without lots and lots of action. The only way that I got to where I am today is just by doing things over and over again, by trying things, by taking lots of action. And I had to switch up my strategies a lot. I had to change and pivot and find out what works. When something stopped working, I just said, okay, what next? It's not about giving up at every roadblock. It's about finding ways to overcome those roadblocks. But sadly, I think writers by nature are a bit more, they tend to worry more than I think the average person. I know that's certainly true for me. But when that makes you get caught up in thinking too much about your career and doubting yourself, and when that translates into stopping you from taking action, that's when it gets into really deadly territory. And basically, you need to train yourself to take action. And of course, the only way to do that is to just do it. And, one funny thing that I'll kind of talk about a little bit more later on in the webinar is about pitching. So when you send pitches to publications, for many writers, that's an extremely intimidating thing. And I've talked to many writers. I've helped them with their first pitches. I've helped them kind of practice and whatnot. And they always say, the first pitch is the hardest. And after that, it gets so much easier, because I've kind of talked to some writers who never end up sending a pitch, and they just kind of, they continue to worry. And then the ones who do end up sending the pitch, they say, that was a lot less scary than I thought. It's like with anything, it just, the first time you do it, it's frightening. You don't know what's going to happen. But the more that you do it, the more you get used to it. So you have to train yourself to just do it. And again, this is where that balance of planning and acting comes in. You don't want to rush out into the battlefield without a plan, but you also don't want to just stay behind closed doors forever and never venture out. And one thing that I felt I needed to say is that when it comes to just writing in general, freelancing opportunities, don't wait around for a better this. Do what you can with what you have, and then that means just really using what you have to the fullest and not waiting around and not making excuses for yourself. Like I had a friend who kind of made fun of himself because he said that, in his life, he kept waiting for a proper this or a proper that, and it was his way of putting things off until he just had everything at his disposal. But in reality, he just needed to take action with what he had. And that's the same thing that's going on here. As tempting as it is, and as rational as those excuses can seem in your mind, you need to just, dispel them and just learn to take action, plan a little bit, but then take action. So you need that balance. And this is all important stuff when it comes to mindset. This is going to, for many people, make or break it. It seems kind of a little more dry, I guess, a little more boring, but it's so important. Training yourself to think in this way is one of the most important things that you can do, especially when you're starting out. And consistency is one of the most important things that you can do, especially when it comes to taking action, because really the only difference between success and failure is consistency. I failed for many, many years. It took me probably 3 to 4 years of doing this as a full-time job before I really found a groove, a rhythm that worked for me. I found out, where the good jobs were, where I should avoid, who I should work with, who I shouldn't. And that was just a result of consistency, of just trying over and over again, trying something, it failing, and then me saying, okay, what's next? If you can be consistent, eventually you're going to find yourself succeeding. If you aren't consistent, then that's going to lead to patches of lethargy and of inaction that are going to really hold you back as a freelancer. And that's going to set you back more and more each time you do it. It sort of has a compounding effect. And the same is true for being consistent. The more consistent you are, the easier it's going to be to succeed more and more. And so whatever you put more time and energy into is what you're going to see in your, in the results. So if you are kind of, lazier and don't do things, you're going to see your career just sort of falling before your eyes. And if you train yourself to be consistent and keep taking action, that's when you're going to see that you just have success after success after success. And eventually you'll be able to get to a stable point. And this does take time, I'm not going to lie. But the important thing is to not change approaches just the minute that something doesn't work, because I see that all the time. I get so many messages from writers who say, I tried this thing once, it didn't work, I'm trying something else. And I always say, well, hold on. I don't think you gave that a fair shake. You need to try it again. You can't just pitch a publication once and then say, okay, that must not be for me because I failed it the first time. And again, that sounds kind of elementary, but you would be surprised at how common it is. Writers just have this tendency to, or at least the ones that I've talked to, they have this tendency to just change approach the second that something fails. Whenever you're doing any sort of strategy, whether that's, freelancing or otherwise, give it some time, give it a fair shake, try it a few times, get the hang of it. And then if it's still not giving you any results, at that point, you can pivot and try something new. And if you just change the minute something doesn't work, you're going to be out of options in no time flat. And again, freelancing takes work. This is going to take a good amount of effort and energy and planning and action from you. And so in that way, especially when you start out, it can be kind of intimidating, but the whole goal with this webinar and with a writing launch in general is to make that process easier. And if you end up joining, you'll see that we have for example, our No BS course, which takes you from basically A to Z in the world of freelance writing, gives you an action plan to go through to really start your career. So you'll find that things like that make it easier, but you'll still have to put work into it. You'll still have to take action. Now we're going to get into sort of the meat and potatoes, if you will, of the webinar and talk about how you find your first few jobs. And I'm sure this is what a lot of you are waiting for. And the approach is rather simple that I'm going to share, but it's really effective. Ultimately, it's about looking in the right places. And again, that sounds kind of basic, but if you're looking at places like, let's say, Upwork or Constant Content or Fiverr, if that's where you're looking, you're not going to find much because you're looking in the wrong places. You're looking in places that pay writers pitifully, where you really don't get to have a say on who you work with, where you have to kind of send in bids and then essentially be the lowest bidder, which is why I've heard those platforms described as a race to the bottom, which cannot be further from the truth, or cannot be closer to the truth, I should say. Spot on. But my point is, if you look in those sorts of places, you're not going to find much because your career is going to be stunted too. I worked on one of those platforms for a little while when I was starting out, and it also set me back so much. I mean, the progress I lost was astounding. And I talked to so many writers who are in similar places. They're writing for one of those platforms or content mills, and they just kind of, they hate it. They're in a spot where they know that they should leave, but they just can't because it's their source of income. So it's easier to not develop a dependency on those places, and instead looking in the right places. So where are the right places? Well, of course, that's whatever works for you. But generally, here are a few guidelines. You want to avoid the websites that post low-paying jobs, whether that's a job board or a content mill or a freelancing platform, all of those. If they are low-paying jobs, just avoid them. And again, this is dependent on you and how much you need to make, but also I think it's an attitude, it's a mindset thing, because writers have a hard time saying no. And I think a lot of people in general have a hard time saying no, but I see this a lot specifically in freelance writing. Whenever somebody gets offered a bad job or something like that, they just take it because they feel like they have to, especially, if you're struggling to find a job and you get something, it feels weird to say no. It feels like you should say yes. But each time you say no, that doesn't mean that you're shutting off any opportunities for future, opportunity for future work. You're just saying no to that opportunity. And like, I had a message from someone in the last month or so who said something to the effect of, I found this opportunity. It, doesn't pay that well, but I'm willing to kind of be treated a little badly if it means I can write about what I love. And I told her, I was like, you need to change that, because you can have both. It doesn't need to be a compromise. You can write about what you love and make money doing it. It doesn't, those aren't mutually exclusive. And, that kind of attitude is so prevalent in freelancing, because that's sort of, it's not only the state of the market, but it's just sort of how writers have been trained to think. If you just Google freelance writing, you would be, it would be understandable if you thought that's what it was. It's just, a lot of low paying jobs, a lot of menial work, but it can be so much more. And there are different ways to do that and to really accomplish your goals, to make a full-time living off this without having to compromise. And so that's what I'm going to be talking about later in the webinar. But for now, it's all about the mindset. You want to avoid those places that are posting the low paying jobs and focus on jobs that value you as a writer and value your craft. And this is a big one. You want to look for opportunities with a low barrier to entry. What I mean by that is opportunities that don't require you to, for example, have a degree, or to have X number of years as a writer, or to have, this or that. And there are many opportunities that don't have those criteria involved, those requirements. You can find so many, and I'm going to be talking later about pitching to publications. That's a great example of a type of writing that you can do from the get-go that doesn't require any experience. Anybody at any experience level, anywhere in the world can do that. So that's why I recommend it so much. But there are other kinds of opportunities of this kind. You just have to be trained to look for them. You have to get used to searching, job platforms and not freelance sites, but like social media pages and different types of websites like that. You have to train yourself to look for, okay, what am I looking for? How can I tell that this is a good job or a bad job? And what are the requirements? Where are the good jobs tending to be? And you'll find these kind of hot spots after a while. And then, stick with those as long as you can, but don't be afraid to pivot if they stop giving you good jobs. But the whole point of that is just, when you look for opportunities with that low barrier to entry, that's when you're really going to be able to get started and get the ball rolling. And finding these can take a while, but don't give up, because they're out there. They kind of fluctuate. There can be a lot in one time and almost none at another time, but that's sort of the fluctuation of the marketplace. So don't get too caught up in that. Just keep trying, and eventually you will find some. And again, don't worry about not having a portfolio. The vast majority of clients and editors that you're going to be dealing with don't care about experience. They want experience, or if people ask for experience, they are asking as sort of a fail-safe. They want to make sure that they're working with people who are trustworthy and who are proven to drive results, right? And ultimately, if you can prove that to them, the battle's won. Ultimately, people want someone who can write well. They want someone who's going to provide them with value. And this is why I focus so much on value. And this is why, and I'll talk about this at the end, but as a writer, you need to think of yourself as a value provider. You're not just providing words on a page. You're providing a service. You're providing something that will be able to help your editor or your client go out there and get results that they want to get. And when you're first starting out, especially, and you don't have any published work, the way to circumvent that is to focus on your strengths and draw attention to your value. One question I get a lot is from writers who don't have a portfolio. And I get this so many times. They always ask, should I say that I don't have a portfolio? And there's no reason to, because if people ask, then you can say, oh, I just don't have one yet. And it's really no big deal most of the time. You want to focus on what you can do. You want to focus on what you have now, which is the ability to write, the ability to understand what your clients want, and the ability to give that to them and assure them that you're going to help them, provide drive results. But if you can convince them of that, if you can, think along those lines, really understand the people you're working with and what they want, then you're going to have a much easier time, especially when you don't have any published work. That's one of the biggest secrets that I can give you on starting out without any experience or any portfolio. And so I hope you take that to heart and really, really, capitalize on that. Now let's talk about finding clients. Usually I bring this up a little later, but I wanted to bring this up right now because it's really important. And when I should say real quick, when I say clients, I mean, businesses or people who are, needing content for some sort of business purpose. And you can find all kinds of clients who are going to hire you for a variety of writing services. And it differs significantly from writing for publications, whereas writing for publications is just, here's an article, take it, publish it. Writing for clients involves a greater understanding of who you're working with and what they want. And I think that this is one of the best ways to expand your network and just get, make more income and increase your number of opportunities. It is more complicated. It's a little more intimidating, but it's so worth it. And it'll give you a slightly different skill set than writing for publications does. And you can always use that. And working with clients is really lucrative. It can help you build your career. And there are so many ways to find clients too. Here are a few. The first and best option is through networking. And this can be as simple as just reaching out into your immediate network of people that you know, family members, friends, coworkers, and saying, hey, do you know anybody who needs writing done? No. Okay. Do you know anybody who might know somebody who needs writing done? It can just be as simple as going through your network, going through all the branches and eventually finding somebody. And we have a lot of case studies on people who have done this. Again, if you sign up and get that free month and join our membership, you can see those case studies of people who just asked in their immediate circle of friends and family and coworkers, and they found jobs right off the bat. Or even, I think we had one writer who asked just people that they knew, people that they were ran into every day, people you come into contact with, whether that's your, barber or your accountant or something like that. Any service provider that you come into contact with on even a regular basis might know somebody who needs that kind of stuff done. And this is the best option because then you get a personalized kind of you get a foot in the door. Whereas if you just do cold calling or cold emailing or whatever, the person that you're coming into contact with has no clue who you are. So if you can get introduced by someone or, kind of find someone through someone else, then that's going to be your best bet. You can also look at job boards. This is another pretty solid way to do it. Of course, there are a lot of bad jobs on job boards, so you have to be really careful. You have to look and see and really be able to filter through the jobs, but there can be some really good jobs. I've found more success on specific content job boards like ProBlogger as opposed to a site like Indeed or Monster. I find fewer opportunities on those because those are usually kind of local places that want, certain levels of expertise and certain, experience levels and whatnot. So you need to be able to filter those jobs, but it can be a really good source. And also social media, there are a lot of pages on Facebook and Instagram and whatnot, and I'm sure Twitter for writing jobs. I know there are a lot of Facebook groups for different writing opportunities where clients will post directly, or some people will just post other opportunities that they found on websites. There are newsletters for this. I mean, it goes on and on. And again, you'll have to filter all of that information, and there's going to be a lot of bad in there. But if you can train yourself to figure out what's good and what's not, then you'll be able to, go through that easier and just have a better time finding the good jobs. And so those are just a few different ways of finding clients. There are many more, but those are just the ones I wanted to hit on for the webinar today. Now, if you're interested in everything that we've learned about so far, I wanted to give you some recommendations for courses if you end up signing up. Everything that we've talked about so far can be found in our No BS course on freelance writing. And this is our flagship course that is great for beginners or great for people who are coming back into freelance writing, or just for people who want to get the lay of the land when it comes to freelancing. And this is a 6-week course that covers everything you need to know about the basics of freelance writing. And it's going to give you, like it says, all the detail with no BS. It cuts straight to the point, and I think you're going to really enjoy it if you've liked everything that we have covered so far. So now I'm going to pivot a little bit, but just keep that in mind. And I want to talk about freelancing for publications now, because this is something that we get a lot of questions about and we get just a lot of interest in. It seems like most people want to do this. And before I go on, I will say, I think that probably most of you watching right now are wanting to do this and just write for publications. And I think it's because writing for publications tends to give you a little more creative freedom, or it gives you the appearance of creative freedom, whereas working with clients often seems to stifle that creativity. But I do encourage you to really consider working with clients and taking a break from publications if that's what you are interested in. At least try out both. The reason is because, if you're looking at doing this for the long term, if you really want to build a thriving freelance career, you're not going to be able to do that just by writing for publications. I mean, you could theoretically, but it would be a lot of work. It would be so hard. It would just be an endless grind. Whereas if you have a mixture of writing for publications and then clients that you work with, it's going to be nice and balanced, and you're going to have a variety of income sources, a variety of difficulty levels, and you'll be able to juggle everything better. So again, go back in that slide if they're on the replay or anything or something like that. Go through our OBS course, take a look at all that client stuff, because I think you'll really find it useful, even if you don't think you will. So just give it a shot. But that said, let's talk about publications. This is probably the best way to get started, especially if you need to build up a portfolio. This is like the number one way to do it, in my opinion. I think that it's probably the best way. And it's also great because it doesn't involve writing for free. A lot of writers feel like they have to write for free to get started, but this is a way that you can write without any experience and get paid for it. The first thing that you need to do is look up publications in your niche that ask for pitches. And this is something important because I just had a message about this today, because many publications will ask for articles up front or like a draft, and they'll want, either an entire article or at least most of one. And we always discourage from submitting to those places, because the way that we approach this, and if you go through some of our earlier YouTube content, you can see this. And certainly if you join up and join the membership, you can see this, is that when you're pitching an article, it should be tailor-made for that specific publication, which means you shouldn't be able to pitch it for anywhere else. The reason being, you need to customize your pitches for each publication, because publications are pickier than ever before. And the best way to ensure success is by really thinking about, okay, what does this publication need? What kind of content would be great for them, not for a variety of publications, just for them. And so when you submit an entire article, there is a high chance that you'll get a no, and then you'll have an article that you really won't be able to do anything with. So if you find publications that just ask for pitches, which I would say most of them do, then that problem is circumvented entirely, because then you're just writing a pitch and coming up with an idea instead of having to write a full article. And pitching is really easy to learn. We have a 4-week course on it. And the more you pitch, the better you get. I learned how to pitch just by doing it over and over again, finding what worked, finding what didn't, analyzing my pitches, going forward, just trying new things over and over again until I found out a pretty solid way of pitching that worked for me. And I've seen this happen with so many writers. It takes a little while to develop your voice as a pitcher, and to find a pitch template that works for you, to find the framework. But once you do, it can get really easy. It can be really, rapid fire. You can just send off pitches and pretty much get a yes almost every time, if you know what you're doing, if you have a good pitch, if you have your targets, if you have your targets identified correctly, if you're aiming for the right publications and all that, it can be really easy. Of course, you'll still get a lot of no's, but you'll also get a lot of yeses. And freelancing in this way is one of the best methods of getting off the ground when you're starting out and have no prior experience or work or portfolio pieces. And this is a great way to build up a portfolio. If you just pitch 3 times and get a yes those 3 times, you have a small portfolio right there with 3 pieces, and that's good enough to be kind of looking at the next level of jobs. So that's why I recommend this as a method of starting out. And of course, we have a lot of webinars and content on this. We have a lot of content in the membership on this. We have an entire course on this, which is breaking the freelance web writing. So if you're interested in that, definitely join up and look through that course. I believe that's a 4 or 5 week course that really goes into the depths of where to look, what to do, and all that. It's going to give you just a breakdown step by step. So definitely check that out if you're interested in this topic. Now that we've kind of covered some of the basics, let's talk about turning freelancing into a career, because this is what the whole point of this webinar is. I want to give at least a brief framework for looking at your freelancing as a whole and saying, okay, I want to make a career for life. How do I do that? So this is a little bit about that. Like I said in the beginning, you have to define your goals. And this is much more important than you think. I know many writers just kind of try things. They have a lot of short-term goals, but they don't have long-term goals. And a lot of the goals aren't specific either. They're just, I want to get published. Well, what does that mean for you? Or I want to, I want to do this or that. There's not a lot of specifics involved. You need to create goals that you can easily track and measure. For example, like being a professional writer, that's not really a goal, because what does that mean? You need to break it down. Okay, how much do you want to make? What kind of work do you want to do? How many published pieces do you want to have? At what point are you going to consider yourself professional? How much time does it require? So all of this requires essentially metrics. You need to be thinking in terms of numbers. How many years do you want to be doing this? How many hours per week do you want to work? How much money per week, per month, per year do you want to make? How much per article do you want to make? Things like that. You need to be thinking really in terms of metrics, really. And this can be a little hard to get used to, but once you've developed a system, it becomes really, really easy, and it'll just help you understand your own goals better. And like I said, yeah, how much money do you need to make? How much time can you dedicate to writing? Things like that. And again, think about the long term. Short-sightedness is one of the things that can really harm a budding writing career. And I see this a lot because when you're starting out, the problem is that you often have to find jobs pretty quickly. So you're often looking from job to job. And it's essentially the freelance version of living from paycheck to paycheck. But the way to circumnavigate that is by thinking about the long term, having those long-term goals in mind, because you cannot have a career as a freelance writer if you don't have long-term goals. It seems really obvious, but if you don't think about it like that, you can end up not doing it. You can just focus on the short term so much that the long term just goes out the window. And that's what you don't want. And here are some questions to ask yourself in relation to that. How can I consistently deliver value and results? And what does that mean for me and my clients? And this is a really important question to ask, because it's going to be different for each writer and pretty much each client, and each editor too, if you're looking at writing for publications. And like I said, your goal as a writer is to deliver value. It's not just providing words. It's not just about the writing. It's about what the writing is going to do for people. And I think that's another problem that writers tend to have, is that kind of short-sightedness, where they don't understand, okay, what is my content actually going to do? How is it actually going to help people? What am I writing it for? Why am I doing this? And when you think about it in that way, it becomes a question of value. And what kind of value do your clients need? What are they looking for? What do they want to do with the content that you're going to give them? Thinking about it in terms of value is just so crucial, especially if you want to do this for a living. I've seen so many writers just kind of fail to do this, and their growth is stunted because of it. So definitely keep this in mind. This is a good one too. How can you become someone's number one problem solver? This is something that I talk about in the courses, but if you work with a client, for example, let's say you work with the same person for a year or something like that, and you have a good working relationship. If someone asks, hey, I need somebody who does content, do you know anybody? What you want is for your client to think of freelance writing and think of your name first, just immediately. Because if you can build that sort of connection and be someone's number one problem solver, you will open the door for yourself to so many potential opportunities, when it comes to networking and, getting your foot in the door like that. And I've had this happen a lot, things like referrals and just networking through people I knew. It's one of the best ways to get writing jobs. And you really, really, really need to focus on this and really take advantage of this as much as you can. And this involves, making sure that the people you work with like you, and they like your work, and your work has done well for them. But it involves so much more. I can't get into all of it right now because we're kind of running out of time, but this is a good question to keep in mind. And again, here is another question that pertains to the long term. How can you find sustainable long-term writing jobs that will provide a steady income? What types of jobs exist like that in my niche, and how can I get them? And this is sort of a multi-phase question. It's going to take a lot of thought. But you want to think about this in terms of your specific situation. So, what long-term writing jobs are out there? What kind of jobs like that exist in my niche? How can I get them? And this goes back to thinking about what type of writing you want to do, the type of people you want to work with, etc. Because those questions are fundamental to answer before you get into more advanced questions like this. And in terms of thinking about the long term, simple questions like, where do you want to be in 1 year? What about in 5 years? You can even do 6 months, or you could even do 10 years. The idea is not that you should have a certain amount of time necessarily in mind, but you should be able to think in both the short term and the long term. And you should be able to have some vague idea of where you want to be, even if you don't know exactly yet. Anything is better than nothing. And don't forget that you can change your goals at any time. It's okay for you to change your mind about something. That was something that I saw someone make a comment on recently where she said, someone told me, it's okay to change my mind. And, when it comes to pivoting as a freelance writer, when it comes to doing this for the long term, that's really important, because sometimes you'll have to change your approach based on what's working and what's not. So keep that in mind as you start up as a freelance writer. Now, if you liked everything that we talked about in those last couple slides, you can learn more about that in the Freelance Career Workshop, which is our newest course. And it's sort of the No BS course part 2. This goes into a lot of advanced strategies and techniques for going into the long term as a freelance writer. So if your goal is to become a full-time freelance writer and make your living off of writing alone, this is going to be a really important course for you. We do recommend people take the No BS course first, as a preliminary, as a prerequisite, but this is a great place to head after that. And I'm really proud of this one. I hope you check it out. And just to finish things off, I want to ask one simple question and kind of maybe let it simmer for a couple seconds before I answer it. But what is your role as a content writer? As a freelance writer, what is your job? And it sounds like a simple question, but there can be so many answers. But based on what I've said today, what do you think it is? The answer is to provide helpful, valuable content. At the end of the day, this is what you need to be focused on as a freelance writer. Because, like I said at the beginning, since we're talking about freelance writing and not creative writing, the goals are going to be different. And the goal is going to be centered around value. So, this is not about sharing a personal message. It's about helping others. It's about providing value to someone else. It's about giving someone content that's going to do something for them. And that begs the question, how can you provide value to the clients and editors that you work with? Now, I don't have a concrete answer to this. I've talked about this a little bit. I talk about this in the courses a lot, but it's going to be different for everybody. And it's really a sort of a personal quest you have to embark on and figure out for yourself. And you have to ask this pretty much every time you get a new client. And it's one of the most important questions to ask, because just thinking about freelancing in terms of value, thinking about yourself as a value provider, that is some of the most important mindset work you can do as a freelancer. And at the end of the day, you want to create content that's going to help your clients and editors achieve their goals. That's the point. Now, of course, that begs the question: how can you write the best possible content to help the most people? What do you need to do on your end to ensure that the goals of your clients and editors can be achieved? How exactly can you help them? And this is so important, because depending on the type of writing you're doing, this can change your approach to it, right? So keep this in mind. Every time that you're doing something as a freelancer, it's really one of the most important questions to have in mind. Something else I wanted to note is that when you're thinking about writing content, it can be helpful to think about it in terms of curation and not creation, because most content that you write is not going to be super original. It's going to be mostly curated information. So if you can curate and present valuable information in an easy to digest way that's going to help people, that's going to be one of the most important kind of just, again, mindset things that you work on as a freelancer. Conceptualizing your job is very important. If you think of yourself as a freelancer, but your goal is to just, tell your life story with every piece of content you publish, then you kind of don't have the whole picture there. But if you think about it in terms of, okay, how can I collect, curate, and present the best information that will help the most people, then you're going to be on the right track, and that's going to really help you create content and write a lot easier. And now I want to get into a Q&A. We have maybe about 10 minutes left, so I'll answer as many questions as I can during that time frame. And of course, don't forget to sign up for Writing Launch, and your first month is free with the coupon code FREE at checkout. We hope to see a lot of you there, but for now, let's get into a few questions.
Thank you, Ian, for that. That's great. I'm going to go ahead and turn off the screen sharing so our audience can see us. Yeah, so if anyone has any questions, please feel free to ask them in the chat. I'll look at the chat and and then we'll answer your questions. We did get a question earlier from Jacqueline, and she asked, I'm a widely published writer who wants tips on how to get paid more money. So like, what is your advice for people who are already like pretty well established? They know how to get published, but they're just not making enough money.
It kind of actually ties into some of the stuff that I talked about, because
Yeah.
writers have a tendency to just kind of be kind of complacent with where they are and not think about, their imagination for their career is kind of limited to what they're currently experiencing. So like, if any given writer has a particular set of jobs, they kind of just assume that, okay, that's what I do. I think a lot of the problem comes from failing to conceptualize what can be beyond, right? And that happened to me. Like, I was in a place where, for, I would say maybe a good 2 years, I kind of kept working with the same client over and over again. It was good, it was solid, but I just wasn't going anywhere. And it occurred to me that, if I'm going to make more money, I have to think differently. I have to think about different types of jobs. I have to think about stepping out of my current comfort zone, or even just awareness level, and learning more about what's out there. So I had to just, for one, raise my rates, right? I mean, that's a simple thing, but it's hard for so many writers to do. And really, you should be raising your rates at least twice per year. I mean, very minimum once a year. I mean, you need to be doing it regularly, is my point, because otherwise there's going to be no trajectory, and the people that see your value are going to be willing to pay you and stick with you as long as they're financially able to. But I think another part of the problem comes from so many people just underpaying writers. Like, even if you're widely published, there's a chance that the jobs you've had haven't paid enough, because that's what people can get away with. And unfortunately, with the market of freelancing, a lot of people are just paying what they know they can get away with. So it's about finding the right people, and just, again, networking can help, raising your rates can help, finding new opportunities. It's kind of a multi-pronged approach, a multifaceted thing. And again, there's no right or wrong answer, but doing all that stuff is at least going to get the ball rolling, and kind of get you aware of what you could do to take things to the next level.
I think there's often a reluctance with writers to raise rates on clients they've had for a long time, because they feel like they don't want to mess up that relationship. Mm-hmm. And like, so many of the good clients, you value that relationship, but ultimately, I think writers need to value their work.
Yeah.
And the only way to really value your work is to make sure that it can fund a sustainable life for you. And that means ultimately raising rates at least some of the time.
Yeah.
Right. And you can delay that with some clients, but eventually you just gotta ask for more money.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, it begs the question, if you don't value yourself as a writer, how are you going to be able to find people who do? It has to start with you knowing your value as a writer, knowing the value of the service that you provide, and then going off that and finding people who mesh with that, instead of having to kind of shoehorn yourself into certain client relationships.
Yeah, I think you can get really concrete in terms of knowing your value as a writer. Yeah. Once you start to really understand your clients and how your work fits in their business. Often, like, say you are doing content marketing for a client, If you can figure out exactly how that content marketing that you're doing, the content writing, say for their blog, is driving sales, that can turn into a very concrete number. You could be generating many tens of thousands of dollars in sales or more. And that's something that the client is going to value. If the blog that you're running for a small business is driving a significant portion of their sales, then you can think about how you charge for that service a little differently than, say, $100 for an article, right? People who really are extremely skilled at this type of marketing and writing can demand extremely high rates, and not only get paid what seems to other writers ludicrous sums of money. Their clients will be extremely happy to pay what others would consider ridiculously high rates for a blog post, for example, because you are providing extreme value. And so many writers that they're just not aware of their role in terms of how the business runs. And the more you can understand, and it's interesting, this is true of other freelancing careers. I've noticed, like computer engineers talk a lot about this, and software engineers, about how the really good, well-paid software engineers, they're well paid because they understand how their role in the business. And if you understand your role in the business as a writer, you can be so much more effective in terms of serving your clients. And also you can know so much more what your value is and what can be charged to them and what they would be happy to pay. Now, this is also another really good question from Jessica. So when you raise your rates, how do you communicate that with your clients? Do you just send it via an email?
Yeah, usually. And we cover this in the courses. I think we have one or two lessons on how to raise your rates without losing clients. So if you're interested in this, definitely join up and take a look at those lessons. But yeah, I mean, I always have done it via email, and be polite, certainly, but also be firm. I've had situations where people just say, "Oh, I can't pay that," and I say, "Okay, well, if you can at some point, feel free to hit me up again." And you have to be firm with that. I mean, like, you want to maybe build in a little leeway, but you have to know kind of what number you're going to tell the client, and then what number is going to be the lowest you can go, but you don't want to compromise. And I think that's the whole thing about raising your rates, is that when you're raising your rates, you're not thinking about it in terms of how much money do I need to make, but you're thinking about it in terms of how much is what I'm providing worth. And this is all going back to value. Everything that I talked about during the webinar, you need to be able to understand the real value of your writing and then charge based on that. And like Jacob said, that's why some writers can just get away with charging so much money. And it can, like, once you get into the really high level stuff, and when you look at certain levels of companies to work with, it can get really insane. Especially if you get into like sales and marketing and aspects like that. But yeah, just via email. And again, you want to be flexible but firm. So, like, don't compromise when you're raising the rates, because that defeats the point, right?
Yeah. Lyle asked about SEO. Is it unimportant, important? Does it limit your success not to know it? Personally, my career basically started with SEO about almost 20 years ago now. And I learned back then SEO was very different, and I learned some SEO techniques that were extremely effective. So I was able to use that to drive traffic to websites, and I earned a significant income that way, just sort of right off the bat in my career, and that was wonderful. And it also, like, gave me some leeway to just keep learning things. A lot of freelance, but it really depends. SEO really depends on the direction you want to take your career. If you want to, say, do content marketing for small businesses, you could sell them on a long-term SEO program. SEO is now, it takes years to really be effective, but
Yeah.
if you want, that's a service you can provide as a writer, is a search engine optimization program in the long term, that will eventually pay off. You have to be able to convince the client that it will pay off in the long term, and a lot of clients understand that. And I know a fair number of writers who operate SEO programs successfully. That's just, I mean, it's just one path forward as a freelance writer that you can do. Ian, I know you have some opinions about this as well.
I'm kind of the opposite way, actually, because I think, you know, SEO and freelance writing are different disciplines. Really, they're different skill sets, and you can certainly have both. But you, like, if your goal is to be a writer, then you don't want to think about SEO, because I think, and maybe you can talk about a little bit about this, but I feel like there is, for many reasons, there is a great divide between what editors and clients actually want and what freelancers think they want. And this is something that I see a lot, is this kind of myth that, like, in order to be a good writer, you have to know all this kind of, in-depth SEO stuff. And you don't, because we've come around so much with SEO that anymore, like when you look up and learn SEO, it's a lot of like basic stuff, but then ultimately you're told to just write for the human, and that almost kind of cancels out all that stuff, because unless you want to get really in depth in the SEO and become like an SEO provider, I don't think you need to be worried about it for freelance writing, because it's just one of those things that I think writers tend to use almost as an excuse to not move forward. I think they say, "Oh, I'm not good at SEO, so I can't write." Well, no, you can. I mean, they're entirely separate disciplines. It just depends on if you want to pursue that or not. It's a bit like saying, "Oh, I can't be a freelance writer because I don't know marketing." Well, you can do content marketing, but you don't have to. It's one path, SEO, content marketing, freelance writing. They're in the same family, but they're very different paths. So I don't think it's necessary at all. And I haven't really had many clients that, require that. And if so, it's just been like simple usage of keywords that really anybody could do without any training. So yeah, I mean, it just depends on what you want to do with it, really.
I would say, really, if you are interested in learning SEO, spend a day just learning about it, and you'll probably learn everything you need to know to be competent at it. And you don't need to invest a lot of time in learning SEO.
Yeah.
It really, as Ian said, it actually does come down to just writing for people. A lot of the websites I operate have extremely successful SEO programs, but they're secondary to just our regular publishing of writing for people and serving people's needs.
Yeah.
And ultimately, that's what drives success in SEO.
Yeah, and we do have a lesson about that. If you go through the new course, the Freelance Career Workshop, we have a lesson called "The Truth About SEO," which is sort of like a crash course in that, and tells you what you need to know. So that's also a good resource if you're interested in that kind of thing.
SEO really is like very basic. It's simple.
Yeah.
It's simple. You don't need to spend a lot of time learning it.
Yeah.
And I say that as someone who has a lot of success with SEO now. So it does not have to be complicated. Yeah. But it is a potential path.
Yeah.
So we also got a question from, Indranil. Sorry if I said your name wrong. What are the options for freelance writing in India? Can I build a thriving freelance writing career abroad? How?
Well, yeah, I mean, I addressed this in the webinar, right? Because, and this is one of the things that I brought up at the very beginning, is that location does not matter. I don't know where this myth came from, that like you need to kind of change your approach based on the country you're in. Like you don't. I mean, if you want to look for jobs within your country, then that's going to change. But like if you're talking about just remote work in the global pool of freelancing, there's absolutely no difference. And I think we really need to, take time to bust this myth that, if you live in a certain country or you're not a native speaker or something like that, that you have to kind of follow a different set of circumstances or guidelines. That's not the case. I've met writers from all over the world who have extremely successful careers. It's about how you apply yourself. It's about the actions you take. So like I said in the beginning, location does not matter at all. Yeah.
Yeah. There is sort of a caveat. where you have to be able to accept payment. And I know certain countries that's a lot more challenging than other countries. Specifically in India, you can get a PayPal account that just works around the world. I've personally worked with a freelance writer from India for 5 years, and she's absolutely wonderful. She does a great job, and yeah, I think she's really happy to have us as a client, and we're happy to have her as a freelance writer that works for us. So yeah, your job is to provide value. You can provide value. Just make sure you can accept money for that.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. I know that like the payment, certain African countries, it's a little more difficult, but that's starting to change even now. So
yeah.
Yeah.
And there are all kinds of solutions for that, and it's going to be more difficult for some people, but there's usually always a way for that to work. So it's just a matter of looking and finding whatever works for you.
So Andrew had a follow-up question about he's a science writer, and what are his options for this field? I would say that part of your job in terms of getting started is to really do that work of like learning about your field and like learning where the opportunities are, especially how they relate to your own interests and specialties. I could give you an answer, but it might not relate to what you're good at or what you're interested in. That's something that you really need to spend time looking at.
Yeah. And that's one of the reasons why it can take a long time, is because like there are questions like that we just can't answer for you. Like if you join the membership, we can teach you a lot about how to get started and how to do that. But like I said at the beginning, this is still something that you're going to need to put a lot of work into. And if you don't, and that's why I said you have to train yourself to take action. That's a great example of that, because it's so easy to ask. It's a lot harder to do. I think there's a good quote that I think it was attributed to some old philosopher, where he was asked what the easiest thing in the world was, and he said to give advice. And so yeah, I think it's very easy to like get caught up in like reading about what works and then telling other people, and just sort of getting kind of caught up in this feedback loop of strategy and not actually taking any action. So like go out there, look for the publications, look in the niche, look for different jobs, different companies, do the groundwork. That's part of your job. Like Jacob said, it's one thing that you just have to kind of bite the bullet on.
Yeah. And we do have resources for people. Like if you join Writing Launch, and if you join that free month of membership, you get access to our database of, I think, almost 1,900 publishers that work with freelance writers. And so that's one path for exploring opportunities. We link directly to the submission guidelines or the editor's contact information, and most of the listings have payment rates researched already, so you can get a sense of the publication opportunities in a niche pretty quickly based on that database. I think we're out of time. We ran a little long today, but I want to thank everybody for coming and spending time with us today. If you want to join us for a free month, we're going to work hard to help you establish your writing career, help you get published and paid. Absolutely free for your first month, and no obligations beyond that. Just go to our website, writinglaunch.com, and when you sign up, use the coupon code FREE. If you have any questions about that, just give us an email, support@writinglaunch.com.
And we also offer unlimited email coaching. So, for our members, we always prioritize their messages, and we've been able to help so many people like that. So if you do join up and have questions, please feel free to send us an email, and you'll get priority response and personalized help, which I think is one of the best things that we offer. So definitely do take advantage of that.
Yeah, we'll be very happy to help you. And thank you for coming, and feel free to email us, support@writinglaunch.com.